Once upon a time, there were two brothers who grew up in the small village at the edge of a great forest. Ramsey and Kelvin. They were raised by their widowed mother, who worked tirelessly to provide for them. Despite their shared upbringing, the brothers took very different paths in life. The younger brother Kevin was married to a kind woman named Linda. She worked hard and cared for their home and never complained. But Kevin was restless. He began to think that his life would be better without her. He told himself, "Since I married her, things have not been moving well with me." Ramsey, the elder, was always steady and responsible. He learned the value of patience and hard work. Earlier on, often helping their mother in the fields or repairing tools. As he grew older, he became a respected figure in the village, known for his wisdom and calm demeanor. He married a gentle woman, and together they built a life rooted in love, trust, and shared values. Kevin, on the other hand, was restless and ambitious. He was calm, he was charming, and quick-witted, but he often sought shortcuts to success. While Ramsey stayed close to home, Kevin ventured to nearby towns, looking for opportunities that promised quick rewards. Linda is a kind and hardworking woman who believed in his dreams and supported him, despite his unpredictable nature. At first, Kevin and Linda's marriage seemed happy. Linda managed the home and her poultry and cared for their children, while Kevin worked odd jobs and pursued ventures that rarely lasted long. Over time, however, Kevin's restlessness began to take a toll on their relationship. He grew dissatisfied, blaming his unhappiness on their modest life and Linda's supposed lack of understanding. He started comparing his life to others, imagining that leaving his family would lead to a better future. The turning point came when one of Kevin's business ventures failed spectacularly. He had invested their savings into a trading scheme that promised high returns but ended in disaster. The loss left him bitter and ashamed. Instead of taking responsibility, Kevin withdrew from Linda, convinced that his failure were partly her fault for not supporting him enough or for holding him back. Ramsey noticed the strain in his brother's marriage and tried to intervene. He saw how Kevin's frustration stemmed not from Linda's but from his own inability to find contentment. Kelvin, however, was too consumed by his feelings of failure and dissatisfaction to see clearly. He confided in Ramsey, declaring his intent to leave Linda and start all over. "I was sitting outside our hut kneading dough for the evening bread when I overheard them. My husband and his older brother were deep in conversation behind the goat pen, their voices low but tense. I couldn't make out every word, but I caught enough to know this wasn't just another discussion about the harvest or the poultry. It was over, my husband said. I have made up my mind." "You a fool," his brother hissed back. "You will regret this." My hands froze in the dough, my heart pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. Was he talking about me? About us? I wanted to cry out, to ask him what he meant, but fear rooted in me. I stayed silent, straining to hear more. His brother's voice softened, but it tried an urgency that made my skin prickle. "If you do this, It will haunt you. She's not the problem. You are. I couldn't hear my husband's reply. The sound of goats shifting in their pen drowned out his words. I stayed there, crossed over the dove, long after their voices had faded, wondering what had gone wrong. The next morning, my husband barely looked at me as he left for his business. He didn't touch the rice and plantain I've made, or even say goodbye. That's when I knew, for sure, he wanted to leave me. I tried to act normal, but my hands shook as I swept the floor and tended to the chores. My mind raced. What had I done? Was I not a good wife? I cooked, cleaned, and cared for him. I'd borne him 4 healthy children. Wasn't that enough? By midday, his older brother Ramsey came to see me. He was carrying a small calabash bowl and a bag of yams. His face was stern, but his eyes were kind. "Sit with me, Linda," he said, settling under the shade of the cashew tree. I wiped my hands in my wrapper and sat, my stomach churning. Ramsey had always been the wiser of the 2 brothers. He had a way of seeing through people as if he could read their souls. "Do you know what your husband plans to do?" he asked, looking straight at me. I nodded, tears stinging my eyes. "He wants to leave me." "What about our children?" I asked. Ramsey sighed, rubbing his hands over his knees. He came to me for advice, told me he's unhappy, that he wants a new life. But I told him the truth. Leaving you won't solve anything. "Why is he unhappy?" I whispered. "I don't understand." Ramsey looked at me for a long moment. Then he leaned forward and spoke in a low voice. "Sometimes people think their problems are outside of them, but often the problem is within." I frowned, not sure what he meant. "Linda, let me ask you, do you still want this marriage?" he said, leaning back against the tree. And I said, "Yes, I love my husband and I love my children." Then Ramsey said, "Linda, since my brother married you, you have worked hard, cared for your home, and you have never complained. Earlier today, your husband came to meet me at home this morning. I didn't argue with him. Instead, I told your husband, 'Very well, but before you leave, I want you to do something for me.' Kevin frowned. 'What is it?' I told him to go and bring for me the clay pot I told him to bury last 7 days. You see, your husband came last week complaining about his marriage. So I handed him a small clay pot and a sharp knife. 'Take this pot into the forest, find a tree with strong roots, and cut a piece of its bark. Then bring the pot back to me.' Kevin thought it was a strange request, but he agreed. He went into the forest and found a tall tree with thick, gnarled roots. He cut a small piece of bark and placed it in the pot. When he returned, I was waiting for him. 'Good,' Ramsey said. 'Now, take the pot and bury it near the tree where you found the bark. Then wait for 7 days.' Again, Kelvin thought it was odd, but he did as his brother asked. He buried the pot near the tree and waited for 7 days. When he returned to the pot, Ramsey was there, holding a hoe. 'Dig it up,' Ramsey said. Kevin dug up the pot and handed it to his brother Ramsey. Opened it and showed him the content. The piece of bark had dried out and shriveled. Its edges coiling inward. "Do you see this?" Ramsey asked. Kelvin nodded. "It's dead." Ramsey looked at him closely. "This is what happens when something is removed from its roots. It dries up, it dies. Your marriage is like this tree. If you cut it off, it will wither. But if you tend to its roots, it can grow strong again." Kelvin stared at the shriveled bark, his heart heavy. For the first time, he realized that his unhappiness wasn't because of his wife. It was because he'd stopped tending to their roots. Ramsey's voice trailed off, and he looked at me with a small sad smile. "Do you understand what I'm saying, Linda?" I nodded slowly. "But what can I do? If he is already decided to leave, how can I change his mind?" Ramsey leaned forward, resting his hand on mine. "You can't change his mind, but you can remind him of the roots you share. Show him what's worth saving. Sometimes people need to be reminded." That evening, when my husband came home, I didn't confront him. Instead, I cooked his favorite meal and sat with him as he ate. I asked him about his day, about the business, about the weather. At first, he was distant, but slowly he began to talk. For the first time in weeks, he looked me in the eyes. Over the few days, I followed Ramsey's advice. I didn't plead or beg. I simply tried to remind my husband of the life we'd built together. I told him stories of when we first met, of the day our children were born, of the times we laughed until our sides hurt. One night, as we lay in bed, he turned to me and said, "Linda, I am sorry." His voice was heavy with guilt. "I've been a fool. I thought living would make me happy, but I see now that I was wrong. You've always been here tending to us, even when I wasn't." Tears streamed down my face as I held his hand. "We can make this work," I whispered, "if we both tend to the root. We can make it grow again." From that day on, things began to change. It wasn't easy. There were still moments of tension, of doubt, but we faced them together. Slowly, we rebuilt what had been broken. One day at a time, Ramsey's advice stayed with me, a reminder of the fragile but powerful bonds that hold us together. And every time I saw the cashew tree outside our hut, I thought of those roots, deep and strong, anchoring us through the storms of life. But yet, I noticed Kelvin was restless. Kelvin's guilt had been eating away at him for weeks, and he finally decided to confide in Ramsey. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Kelvin approached his brother while he was mending a fence near the edge of their property. Ramsey noticed the troubled look in Kelvin's eyes and set down his tools. Without much prompting, Kelvin began to speak, his voice heavy with shame. He admitted that during his time in town, he had become involved with a woman named Grace, whose sharp wit and charm had drawn him in. Kevin confessed that their affair had resulted in a child, a baby girl who had just been born. He confessed to Ramsey that he planned to leave Linda and move in with Grace, claiming that he was more intelligent and wise, and that life with her would be more fulfilling. "But now, I don't know what to do, brother," Kevin said. his voice cracking. Grace says she can't raise the child on her own, and part of me feels I should be with her. She's different from Linda, smarter, maybe even better for me. Ramsey had sunk as he listened, but he kept his expression calm. After a long silence, Ramsey placed a hand on Kevin's shoulder and spoke firmly. Kevin, you've made a mistake, but running from it won't fix anything. Let's sit down and figure out what's best for everyone, including the child. Kevin nodded reluctantly, feeling both relieved and ashamed to have shared his burden. Ramsey was deeply disappointed in his younger brother, but refused to give up on him. He knew that Kevin's infatuation with Grace was another symptom of his inability to face his own flaws. Ramsey decided to visit Grace, hoping to resolve the situation before it caused irreversible damage. When he arrived at Grace's modest home, he found her overwhelmed and exhausted from caring for the newborn. Ramsey spoke to her gently but firmly, explaining that Kevin's place was with his wife and children, and that raising the baby within Linda's stable home would be best for everyone involved. Grace listened intently, her initial defensiveness giving way to understanding. She admitted that she wasn't prepared to raise a child on her own and agreed to let the baby go if they could ensure her well-being. Ramsey and Kevin arranged to pay Grace fair sum to support her as she moved forward with her life. With Grace's reluctant blessing, the baby girl was brought to Linda, who welcomed her into their home with open arms. Despite the pain of betrayal, Linda chose to rise above it, nurturing the child as her own. She named her Joy, a symbol of new beginnings. Kelvin, humbled by the events and Linda's unwavering loyalty, began to reevaluate his choices. He saw the strength and wisdom in his wife that he had once overlooked. With Ramsey's guidance, Kelvin decided to focus on helping Linda grow their poultry farm. He poured his energy into the business, learning the intricacies of raising and selling chickens. Over time, the farm began to thrive, providing a steady income and a sense of purpose for Kelvin. As the years passed, the family's fortune improved. Joy grew up loved and cared for, never knowing the circumstances of her birth. Linda's kindness and forgiveness became the foundation of their renewed marriage, and Kevin's commitment to the farm brought stability to their household. The farm became a symbol of their resilience, a testament to the power of second chance and the strength of family. Together, they built a life rooted in forgiveness, hard work, and the sheer determination to nurture what truly mattered. As Kevin grew more invested in the poultry business, he began exploring ways to diversify and expand their income. After consulting with Ramsey and other experienced farmers in the village, he decided to include piggery alongside the poultry farm. The decision proved to be a wise one. With Linda's support and Kevin's newfound dedication, they built pigsties and began raising pigs alongside their chicken. The piggery provided an additional source of income, and soon the farm became one of the most successful in the region. The extra earnings allowed them to improve their home and send their children to school, and even employ a few workers to help manage the growing workload. Years later, Joy, the baby girl Linda has raised as her own, grew into a bright and ambitious young woman. She pursued her education with determination and eventually met and married a kind man from Finland. When Joy moved abroad with her husband, she remained deeply connected to her family. Grateful for all Linda had done for her, she invited her to join her in Finland when she gave birth to twins, to experience a new chapter of life. Though it was difficult to leave the farm, Linda embraced the opportunity, knowing that Kevin and the farm were in a good place. The journey symbolized the fruits of Linda's sacrifices and the resilience of their family, showing how love and forgiveness can create ripples of success and happiness. The root of Kevin's marital issues was not Linda's or their life together. It was his own discontent and lack of commitment to building a strong foundation. Through Ramsey's wisdom and Linda's patience, Kevin began to realize that happiness wasn't something to chase elsewhere. It was something to cultivate within his own home.